It has arrived. 3.5 years ago, when Donald Trump came down that golden escalator, I laughed and I could not help but think to myself, if he gets elected, they will very likely try to impeach his ass. And here we are, friends. I haven't really checked in with the news for a few days because I've been very focused on a creative task, but it's been percolating up, obviously in headlines and whatnot. And I knew from all of last week that this week would be the week, and here we are. Let's just dive right into whatever is going on Capitol Hill, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 12:15 p.m. Pacific Time, with the... It's glorious to see these words on the TV screen. And it's not that I hate Donald Trump, and it's not that I'm really fucking tore up and adamant about removing him. It's that I'm going to enjoy whatever the theatrics of this event really turn out to be. And I'm going to be very curious to see if I can find out what it is serving to distract us from. Because if there's one thing I know, or at least suspect, I shouldn't say no, because that sounds grandiose and almost elitist of me, and that's something I try not to be. But if there's one thing I suspect very strongly, is that while this may or may not be completely fake or be completely true, I think it's a bit of a mix of both, right? Yin and yang, constantly intertwined. But it is most certainly being used as part of a very sophisticated half-truth, half-nonsense echo chamber system of manipulation. So one must keep one's eye on the show, but also look towards, other things, bigger things, things that are not happening in the jingle-jangle bells and whistles of the distractionary show. Fun fact, for example, I've been paying somewhat attention. I can't say I'm a total political, historical nerd and know all the details. No. But I've been paying close, genuine, authentic attention from my own perspective to my own limited ability to look into things and kind of, going with my gut and my guidance about what I think, not buying into anybody's nonsense right away. And one thing that's evidently clear to me is that regardless of rhetoric, independent of whatever promises are made and then subsequently broken, because trust me, friends, no matter what you do, no matter which party you vote for, the politicians make promises and then turn around and subsequently break a good chunk of those promises. Could that all be part of some generalized strategy? Not a nuanced, individually detailed puppeteering, but a sort of wind them up and then set them loose and see what happens kind of manipulation? Or puppeteering of said politicians? Perhaps. But the trend that I find most humorously alarming and simultaneously comically ignored in our day is that year over year, president after president, no matter what, my friends, more bombs were dropped by each subsequent president than were dropped by the president before them. So I was that asshole going, yeah, Obama's pretty slick, and it's great that there has been a person of color in that office now. Hooray, hooray, hooray. But until we achieve the spiritual, species-wide, third-eye-opening, transcendental healing that is necessary and required for us to move forward in our development and advance to a better, more sustainable, more spiritually holistic way of engaging with one another, until we achieve that healing and transformation, then it will remain the case, I think. I once again say I suspect very strongly, but cannot claim to know 100% for sure, because it's always a fool's journey to be like, I'm 100% certain about this, and then try to make that work. But I digress. I feel very confident that, on average, When it comes to presidential politics, most certainly, if not all politicians at all and at large, that no matter who they are, no matter where they start from, no matter how they get into that office, at some point or another, the hooks sink in, and the puppet master begins to puppeteer them. Now, the puppet master is not Putin. The puppet master is not Trump, as I've said before, and I shall probably say again, my friends. All of this goes deeper than any of the commentary in the reality TV show even hints at. If you know what I'm talking about, cool. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please do turn your attention to Volume 1, which is really, labeled on the internet Season 1 of the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo's Almost Daily Zencast, a talk show, political socio-economical analysis in podcast format. For I've already spelled that all out. But as we are here now, prepared to press play on the news, let us do so, my friends.
Use of prosecutors precisely to conduct investigation of political opponents. That's a legacy, I dare suggest, from the Soviet era, when, as you stated in your testimony, prosecutors like the KGB were, and I quote you now, instruments of oppression.
I said that, and I believe it's true.
So finally, Mr. Kent, for as long as I can remember, U.S. foreign policy has been predicated on advancing principled interest and democratic values, notably freedom of speech, press, assembly, religion, free, fair, and open elections, and the rule of law. Mr. Kent, when American leaders ask foreign governments to investigate their potential rivals, doesn't that make it harder for us to advocate on behalf of those democratic values?
I believe it makes it more difficult for our diplomatic representatives overseas to carry out those policy goals, yes.
How is that, sir?
Well, there's an issue of credibility. They hear diplomats on the ground saying one thing, and they hear other U.S. leaders saying something else.
Ambassador Taylor, would you agree with that, sir?
I would.
Is there anything you'd like to add about how it might make it more difficult for you to do your job, sir?
Our credibility is based on a respect for the United States. And if we damage that respect, then it hurts our credibility and makes it more difficult for us to do our jobs.
Anyone looking at the facts can see what happened was an abuse of power. Anyone looking at the facts can see that what happened was unethical. Anyone looking at the facts can see, anyone looking at the facts can see that what went on was just plain wrong. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 55 days. 55 days between July 18th and September 11th that there was a delay on sending hard-earned tax dollars of the American people to Ukraine. We're not talking any country, we're talking Ukraine. Ernst & Young said one of the 3 most corrupt countries on the planet. Our witness on Friday, she testified.
Let's pause there. This is a momentous moment. In truth, we're living through some wild and interesting history, right? No matter which side you're on, no matter who you think is full of bullshit and who you think is full of the truth, darned if it ain't some really wild and crazy times, politically speaking. Now, personally, my theory about politics is quite absurd. It is, in my opinion, humble as that may be, as poorly informed as it might be. Because, honestly, there's a lot I don't know, right? Do you ever check yourself with that question, my friends? Ever? How much do I not know about what's going on? It keeps you humble, and it keeps you focused on relevant facts as opposed to wild, opinionated, theoretical statements. Then again, people say that I am totally and completely nonsensically hypocritical because I do indeed anchor my worldview around some wild, heretical sounding, difficult to verify, but not impossible in my humble opinion, difficult to prove statements that can only be phrased in the theoretical because they are in fact, there for you to verify and test for yourself internally as phenomenological events. But they are extremely uncommon, extremely rare, and extremely elusive. But I digress. That's a whole nother episode. We cannot deny the momentousness of this particular historical moment that we are momenting through. As we build momentum towards either a cataclysmic civil war, as some have privately and others publicly predicted, or some disgruntled sort of form of checks and balances, some grumbly sort of rusty arcane, yes, absolutely riddled with corruption, but also, quite possibly, also struggling to be full of brim full of, what's that phrase? Wine and vinegar, spirit and vinegar. There's a phrase there that means like, spit and polish. It's like some weird oxymoronic cat's meow that means like it's cool. I forget what it is. I digress. We don't know which way things will turn out. And everyone that is really anchored and rooted, and please note, I'm not making libelous or erroneous accusations. I'm trying to scientifically calculate predictable group dynamics and behavior in the general sense, in the statistically relative and viable sense, in that people out there in public, in the base, might respond in this way, etc. Do we think that there's going to be a civil war? In real terms, will we slowly be butchering each other in the streets along battlefront lines that literally physically scissor across the states in every state in all 50 states of this glorious nation of ours? I don't know. But as one social media memeified and someone said it quite memingly, that was it very quickly, it was just a post and it became its own meme very quickly. That's very unlikely. But what is very likely is that people who have been triggered and activated and wound up by this echo chamber of ideological brainwashing might very well get worked up enough to commit violence in either direction. And you can't just say, oh, that violence problem is only over there in that demographic. That's nonsense. That's how they get ya with the us versus them ism. So, I wanted to pause here and ask a bunch of questions. One of the questions is, what do you think about what they just said? Have you forgotten what they just said already? What do you think about what they just said? What the guy who was asking the questions just said? That anyone who's really clear on the facts cannot deny that this is an abuse of power. Is that true? If you said everything else aside, does it cross the line, or doesn't it? And I know that there's one of my most recent posts on Facebook acknowledges the fact that both sides of the echo chamber are claiming that the other side is riddled with a vast and intricate conspiracy. I think it's quite humorous. I'm not going to look it up, but I think it reads something to the effect of the thing I posted reads something to the effect of right-wing media, there is a vast and wide conspiracy in the left-wing media. period. And then left-wing media, : there is a vast and wide conspiracy in the right-wing media. Say what now? And then it's like me, and I want to revise this, but it in its original form it reads me, : it takes two birds, sorry, I always say that wrong. It takes two wings for a bird to fly, yo. And then I thought of a rephrasing, and I don't remember if I wrote it down or not, but I wanted to rephrase it to something to the effect of poo. Not poo, but I can't remember now what it was. Hopefully it'll come back to me in just a minute now that I've hit the speed bump. Let's hear what they have to say next.
Deposition. Corruption is not just prevalent in Ukraine, it's the system. So our president...
That's Republican Jim Jordan, Intelligence Committee. Now, I don't want to sound like a dick here, but I think I'm going to guess which way he's going to go. I think I'll take a stab at this one. He's going to say that dear old Donald J. Drumpf. Everyone ever wonder what the J stands for? I can't, off the top of my head, remember. And maybe I've asked that question before on the podcast and found out. But is it Johnson? It'd be great if it was Johnson. That'd be hilarious if it was Donald Dick Drumpf. Sorry, that was an attempt at satire. So don't sue me. But I think, and I'm not a psychic, I don't claim one to be anywhere, neither on TV nor in real life. But I think that Jim Jordan, and Donald Johnson. Can you imagine if this was Donald Johnson? President Donald Johnson. That would be like the Beachbody. If he was Jack LaLanne / not Hugh Hefner. Yeah, a dash of Hugh Hefner with a little bit of the Hoffmeister, from the Lifeguard show. A little bit of the David Hasselhoff. If he was president, if there was a guy like that, that would be Donald Johnson. You wouldn't even bother with whatever the fuck his other last names were. It would just stop there. But I digress. What I was saying, the Republicans have already echo chamber tested and approved the following attempt to control the narrative. He's going to say, I think, I could be wrong, and I swear to you, hand on a Bible, hand on a Torah, hand on your favorite book here, hand on a Quran, I don't care which one, you hand on the shopping list, hand on your great-grandmother's jar of ashes, if that's what you need me to, if you need to believe me to do that. Take 12. If you need me to do something like that for you to believe me, I'll do it. But I think, I'm not bullshitting here, I think the Republicans are going to say the president was investigating corruption in the Ukraine. You can't say that investigating corruption is corruption because he was investigating corruption. And they're going to do some sort of word magic, okay? I don't want to sound crazy, like I'm some sort of way nut job, Lulu out there, conspiracy theorist. This is like not anthropomology. What's the actual word I'm trying to say? This is neuro-linguistic programming, and you can see, the historical record of it in anthropology and the historical study of history. And I don't mean dinosaurs. I mean, but in the historical study of human history, you can see that people use words, and we'll put it in benign terms so it doesn't feel so ominous. Marketing. Politicians use marketing tools aggressively. And marketing is something you can be like, psha, it's marketing. Meh, I don't give a fuck. Marketing can't get to me. Nobody can market me. MAGA, buy a hat, wave a flag, drink this beer because it's got red, white, and blue. Marketing. It doesn't fuck with you. And that's why they made up the word. You can dismiss it as you flagrantly exhibit the behaviors that are representative and evidentiary of being manipulated by marketing. And you can still dismiss it and blow it off. But you say magic and people are like scared shitless. Shared stickless. No, that wouldn't be the right. I've got friends that insist on spoonerizing things everywhere, so now everyone will stop and spoonerize pairs of words, which aggravates my verbal dyslexia and I struggled for... I just threw the remote control on the ground because I was so frustrated by this memory. No, I kid you not. I mean, I am kidding about that. I accidentally just, I lost control, man. Where am I going with this? Right. I fought hard in my mind for many years to overcome the problem of spoonerizing, and now all these folks, well-intentioned as they may be, are doing it all around me, and I'm beginning to feel like it just creeping in, which is funny but also difficult for me. But I digress. The fuck was I talking about? Oh yeah, I'm trying to predict what Jim Jordan's going to say. They're going to be like, you can't impeach him for investigating bad guys. He was investigating the bad guys. That makes him the good guy. And like, quick reminder, folks. The law is pretty clear. You can't ask a foreign government for favors. Period. Full stop. Yes, you can do a coordinated investigation into government corruption spectrum-wide with a coalition of agencies and responsible players on the field and conduct, joint operations. Of course you can. But that's not the same as Giuliani running around like a chicken with his head cut off, pretending to be a more than he actually is, because all he was a private personal lawyer for the president, not a duly. So this is abuse of power categorically. Question mark, is it yes or no? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Send them to me. I'm going to let this run so that I get a good big chunk of more audio about them saying stuff. But also, this is pretty good for an episode in and of itself. And I'm running out of voice because my voice just gets tired. Podcast life, right? So check this out. I'm probably going to just wrap it up without a bookend closer of me talking more. And I'll see you on the flip side.
Said time out. Time out. Let's check out this new guy. Let's see if Zelensky's the real deal. This new guy who got elected in April, whose party took power in July. Let's see if he's legitimate. Now keep in mind, as has already been discussed, in 2018, President Trump had already done more for Ukraine than Obama did. That's right. President Trump, who doesn't like foreign aid, who wanted European countries to do more, who knew how corrupt Ukraine was, did more than Obama because he gave him javelins. Tank-busting javelins to fight the Russians. Our witnesses have said this, others have said this. Obama gave him blankets, Trump gave him missiles. But when it came time to check out this new guy, President Trump said, let's just see if he's legit. So for 55 days, we checked him out. President Zelensky had 5 interactions with senior U.S. officials in that time frame. One was, of course, the phone call, the July 25th phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky. And there were 4 other face-to-face meetings with other senior U.S. officials. And guess what? Not one of those interactions, not one, were security assistance dollars linked to investigating Burisma or Biden. But guess what did happen in those 55 days? U.S. senators, Ambassador Bolton, Vice President Pence, all became convinced that Zelensky was, in fact, worth the risk. He was, in fact, legit and the real deal and a real change. And guess what? They told the president, he's a reformer, release the money. And that's exactly what President Trump did. Now, over the next few weeks, we're going to have more witnesses like we've had today that the Democrats will parade in here, and they're all going to say this. So-and-so said such and such to so-and-so, and therefore, we got to impeach the president. Actually, we can get more specific.
Actually, Mr. Jordan, we can get more specific. Straight from the transcript that Trump himself released. Which, by the way, the day that happened, I was like, seriously, dude? Someone else said this too, and I was just like, high five, bro, you said it. How do you manage to release a transcript in the effort to appear transparent and yet acknowledge openly that it's edited, right? Because it says so right there. I mean, if you've read the transcripts, if you're wearing a big fucking read the transcripts t-shirt at the fucking events, I hope you actually noticed in the disclaimers. And this is why reading EULA's disclaimers and the fucking manual to anything you buy is so important. But in the disclaimer for the transcript, and here we're buying an idea, right? It says that this is, as a document, incomplete and not a word-for-word transcript of the phone call. It says so right there. It is not, capital N, capital O, capital T, a word-for-word transcription of the phone call. Okay? So they made an effort to trim things out. We've heard testimony from Vim and others that shit was left out, that people tried to put back in, that somebody went, no, you can't put that in there. And yet, when it was released, they kept the one sentence that, in my opinion, was like, the moment I heard it, I'm like, wow, if that doesn't hang them all, I don't know what does. But in the transcript, it's right there. I've read it. If you read it, it says, blah, 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 blah. And the president said, hold on, I'm paraphrasing, but I forgot what the javelins. I couldn't remember. Zelensky asks for the javelins, and Trump says, yes, but I need you to do me a favor, though. Now, we can try to deconstruct that sentence and pretend that that's not abuse of power. But when someone says, please, please, please hand me that knife so I can defend myself against the bear that's charging at me, and you stop and go, of course, but I need you to do me a favor, though, as you dangle the knife or the gun or the whatever the fuck you would use to defend, in this case, javelins, you would use to defend yourself against the bear. In this case, Russia? Now pause. I don't know if they're going to get into this anytime soon during the hearings, and I doubt I'm going to leave this recording rolling for that long to find out on tape. But I've been itching to talk about this for the show at a really long time, and I'm going to drop it right here. What was the very first scandal? Before the golden escalator, before the fake supporters on the day that he came down the golden escalator, which I know, it's not actually technically golden, but it's close enough. It's that bright, brassy, silvery brass, of like luxury. You're in a luxury building. Okay, so before that, the very, very, very first real, like legit, impressive, what the fuck is going on? Like, this should be calamitous alarm bells of a controversy that happened, was that certain people directly connected to the Trump campaign staff, who were like sort of like surprising others, showing up at a GOP coordinating committee meeting, wanted to change two platform planks in the GOP's political platform. And these two platform planks, as we like to call them in the industry, or these two talking points, these two sections of our overall political agenda is thus, and you make a document and you always revise it, and like that's what parties do, right? And so this very, very, like, it quickly flashed in the pan controversy and then just got swept away. And I don't know anybody talking about it anymore, but should be at the heart of everything, was about this weird attempt to change two policy positions that the GOP had spent many years developing and asserting and, coming to. And what is the weird part? These two policy things, the exact wording of which I will not remember, but I know the one place that ties them together. They both were explicitly about Crimea. Now, if you don't know what Crimea is or where it is located, then you shouldn't be arguing about whether or not what Trump just did. I'm sorry, I just butchered his name. Can we take another take? Because, the There's no one here conveniently to blame for having coughed really hard so I can make a bit out of it. But if there were, I'd make a bit out of it. Da-da-da. Insert bit here. So, Crimea is the place that, wait for it, used to be part of the Ukraine. And that, wait for it, Russia invaded. Now, I hate to sound like I'm talking to a 12-year-old, but you can say all you want. There's no collusion, no collusion, no collusion. But the through line is stupidly obvious. There is an ongoing war over this bit of land and this water port, this port. And what's fun and weird and bizarre and kind of hilarious is that not only years into the Donald Trump presidency was the most recent bizarre thing that happened that Trump totally capitulated, didn't do anything a normal American president would have done. Because pause right here, folks. I don't care which position you have. I think we can all agree none of this is normal. If you support Trump and you want this to be normal, great. Free will. You have that right. But if you support Trump and you want to pretend that this has always been normal, there's definitely something wrinkly new about what's going on here. But it's only escalation of what has been the status quo, which is that the puppets are here to distract us from what the war profiteers are actually doing, right? But the through line is the puppets always do what it takes, what isn't required of them, so that the puppeteers, and which are really, it goes layers deep, but you can kind of generally point to the military industrial complex and the bazillionaire oligarchs who profiteer on war. But in truth, it's deeper than that. And I'm not talking Masons or Illuminati or space aliens. If you haven't heard me say it, I'll save that. I'll introduce you. If you're new to the show, welcome. I'll introduce you to the idea I call putting a pin in the board. I've said that sentence before, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole right now. So I'm going to tell you, if this is your first episode of my humble little podcast, put a pin up on that board and remember it, because we're going to eventually talk about it in a past episode, which to you is in your future because you haven't heard it yet, right? Okay, cool. So I'm going to let this run for a bit like I promised. But boom, there you go. It was interesting tack, by the way. The thing I thought they were going to say, he sort of warmed up with that sort of general inclination and then went a different direction that didn't really knock it out of the park too far, I think. And quite frankly, although I am not a Democrat, for clarity, friends, anyone who does not know, if you're listening to this podcast and you are not aware of the following fact, it will help you to comprehend where I'm coming from, to know that I support neither political party. All political ideology is a form of mental slavery. I watch this because it is reality TV and entertaining to me. This is more entertaining to me than Big Brother or, Slutty Housewives of whatever the fuck county. I don't care. This, because it has real consequences, right? I mock it and I ridicule it and I help people realize that it should be taken down from the fucking altar that it's been put upon, because politics has become a kind of idol that we worship. And what does God say about that in the Bible? Not that I'm a big Bible thumper. I used to be, but I digress. You'll see. It all makes sense in the end. Yeah, the real puppet masters are somewhere else. And I've already talked about that at length, so catch up with us. Here comes some more Capitol Hill live, semi-live, delayed on my system here because I've been rambling at you. And this may not go up for another couple days, so this may be a day or 2 or 3 delayed. But I'm recording it almost live, as it were. It's sort of like live tweeting, except it's a podcast.
Covered this a little bit ago. They'll say something like Ambassador Sondland said in his deposition, where he said, Ambassador Taylor recalls that Mr. Morrison told Ambassador Taylor that I told Mr. Morrison that I conveyed this message to Mr. Yarmouk on September 1st, 2019 in connection with Vice President Pence's visit to Warsaw and a meeting with President Zelensky. And if you can follow that, that's the Democrats' plan and why they want to impeach the president. That's what we're going to hear over the next couple weeks. That's what we're going to hear. But no matter what they do, no matter how many witnesses they bring in here, 4 facts will not change, have not changed, will never change. The call shows no linkage between dollars and the investigation into Burisma or the Bidens. President Trump and President Zelensky have both said on the call there was no linkage, there was no pressure, there was no pushing. Ukrainians didn't even know the aid was withheld at the time of the phone call. And most importantly, as has been pointed out, the Ukrainians didn't take any specific action relative to investigations to get the money released. Now, there is one witness that they won't bring in front of us. They won't bring in front of the American people. And that's the guy who started it all, the whistleblower. Nope. 435 members of Congress. Only one gets to know who that person is. Only one member of Congress has a staff that gets to talk to that person. The rest of us don't. Only chairmanship knows who the whistleblower is. We don't. We will never get the chance. We will never get the chance to see the whistleblower raise his right hand, swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. We'll never get that chance. More importantly, the American people won't get that chance. This anonymous so-called whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, who's biased against the president, who worked with Joe Biden, who is the reason we're all sitting here today, will never get a chance to question that individual. Democrats are trying to impeach the president based on all that. 11 and a half months before an election. We'll not get to check out his credibility, his motivations, his bias. I said this last week, but this is a sad day. This is a sad day for this country. You think about what the Democrats have put our nation through for the last 3 years. Started July of 2016 when they spied on 2 American citizens associated with the presidential campaign, and all that unfolded with the Mueller investigation after that. And when that didn't work, here we are. Based on this. The American people see through all this. They understand the facts support the president. They understand this process is unfair. And they see through the whole darn sham. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you. I say to my colleague, I'd be glad to have the person who started it all come in and testify. President Trump is welcome to take a seat right there. You know, the question here is not a dispute about the enormous power that a president has. The question is whether, in this case, there was an abuse of that power. The president can fire an ambassador for any reason whatsoever. The president can change his policy, as he did when he opened the door for Turkey to go in and invade Kurdistan, despite opposition from many of his senior advisors. The president could change his position and our position on Ukraine. But is there a limit? There is. Because our Constitution says no one is above the law. And that limit is that one cannot, even as president, use the public trust of high office for personal gain. The law prohibits any one of us here on the dais from seeking foreign assistance in our campaigns. The question for us is whether the use of power by the president was for the benefit of advancing his political interest in the 2020 campaign. And by the way, to my colleagues, if the president wants to attack Joe Biden and his son, he's free to do it. All fair and square in campaigns. He's just not free to change our foreign policy unless he gets his way to assist him in that campaign. That's a line he can't cross. Now, you all have been very clear about what our continuous foreign policy was. And Ambassador Taylor, just very quickly describe why us withholding aid interfered with achieving our national security goals.
Mr. Welch, one of our national security goals is to resolve conflicts in Europe. There is one major conflict in Europe. It's a fighting war. Our national security goals in support of Ukraine, in support of a broader strategic approach to Europe, is to facilitate that negotiation, is to try to support Ukraine when it negotiates with the Russians.
And I want to go back, because in the historical context, Mr. Kent, that you and Ambassador Taylor provided, we had 70 years of peace after the war, in which we lost over 400,000 American lives. And that took care. And that was in jeopardy, as you described it, Ambassador Taylor. And that threatened each and every one of us up here in the constituents we represent. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement.
I want to do 3 dates, too. I only have a little time. But July 24, July 25, and July 26. July 24th, Director Mueller testified about his investigation, and he established beyond doubt that it was the Russians who interfered in our election. And he expressed a fear that would be the new normal. On July 25th, according to the readout of the president's campaign, he asked the Ukrainians to investigate Ukrainian interference in our election that had been repudiated. And then on July 26th, as I understand it, this person who reported to you heard the president saying he wanted investigations again in Ukraine. So this is the question. The new normal that Director Mueller feared, is there a new normal that you fear that a president, any president, can use congressionally approved foreign aid as a lever to get personal advantage in something that is in his interest but not the public interest?
That should not be the case, Mr. Welsh.
I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the transcript from the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky. You yourself, Mr. Chairman, have mischaracterized the call. In fact, in the first open hearing, you had a parody.
Gentlewoman will suspend. By unanimous consent, be happy to enter the call record into the record. Mr. Mueller, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. Ambassador Taylor, what year did you graduate from West Point?
1969, sir.
It was the height of the Vietnam War, wasn't it, sir?
The height was about that time.
What was your class rank at West Point, sir?
I was number 5.
How many people were in your class?
800.
800 cadets, you were number 5.
Yes, sir.
So when you're top 1% of your class at West Point, you probably get your pick of assignments, but you picked the infantry.
I did, sir. Yes, sir.
You're a rifle company commander?
Yes, sir.
Where'd you serve?
In Vietnam.
Did you see combat in Vietnam, sir?
I did.
Did you earn any accommodations for that service?
I was awarded the Combat Infantryman's Badge, which is my highest, I'm proudest of. There was a Bronze Star, there was an Air Medal with V.
That's for valor, isn't it, sir?
It is.
Let's talk about July 26th, a lot of years later. You go to the front, you go to Donbass with Ambassador Volker, I believe, and you're on the bridge, and you're looking over on the front line at the Russian soldiers. Is that what you recall?
Yes, sir.
And you said the commander there, the Ukrainian commander, thanked you for the American military assistance that you knew was being withheld at that moment.
That's correct.
How'd that make you feel, sir?
Badly.
Why?
Because it was clear that that commander counted on us. It was clear that that commander had confidence in us. It was clear that that commander was appreciative of the capabilities that he was given by that assistance, but also the reassurance that we were supporting him.
You don't strike me as a quitter, Ambassador, but you threatened to resign, or you mentioned it in your statement. Before I ask you about that, let's just talk about a couple days later, on 1 month later, on August 28th. You find yourself in Ukraine with the National Security Advisor, Mr. Bolton, right?
Yes, sir.
And you convey to him your concerns. You've testified to this previously about the withholding of military assistance. What does he say to you?
He says that he shares my concern, and he advises me to expressed that in a very special way to the Secretary of State.
Now, he's the National Security Advisor, works directly with the President, but he tells you that you should bring it up with the Secretary of State.
Yes, sir.
Have you ever sent a cable like that? How many times in your career of 40, 50 years have you sent a cable directly to the Secretary of State?
Once.
This time?
Yes, sir.
In 50 years?
Rifle company commanders don't send cables, but yes, sir.
So the National Security Advisor, who could tell it to the President himself and who shares your concern, says you, the ambassador serving in Ukraine, should cable the Secretary of State directly, and you do so, don't you?
Yes, sir.
What'd the cable say, sir?
It's classified cable.
Without going into classified information?
Without going into classified, it says security assistance. It's what we've been talking about today. Security assistance to Ukraine at this particular time, as in previous time, is very important. Ukraine, I also make the point that we've also talked about here today, Ukraine is important for our national security, and we should support it.
So,
not to provide that would be folly.
Did you get an answer to your cable?
Not directly, no, sir.
Do you know what happened to it?
Secretary Kent
Secretary Kent, do you know what happened to it?
tells me that.
Yeah, I was on vacation. When his cable came in, but my understanding is it made it to its recipient, intended recipient, Secretary Pompeo.
And we know Secretary Pompeo was on the call a month earlier on July 25th. It's not like he's in the dark about any of this. What did he do with it?
I honestly can't say for sure what happened with the cable once the message was brought in at the highest level.
One other question, gentlemen. On September 1st, you recall a meeting between the Vice President and the President of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky, in which, right off the bat, the President of Ukraine raises security assistance. And the Vice President, according to your telling, says, I'll talk to the President tonight about that. I'll make a call. Do you know whether the Vice President made that call?
I don't know, sir.
Do you know what, if anything, the Vice President had to do with any of this? What more can you tell us about the Vice President's role in this? Do you know if he ever raised this issue with anyone in the administration, whether he ever pushed for the release of that security assistance?
I can't, sir.
I believe, to the best of my understanding, the Vice President was an advocate for the release of the assistance.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Demings, you're
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
The General will state his request.
I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record the Politico article on Ukraine boosting the Clinton campaign, authored by Ken Vogel,
Without
now at the
objection.
New York Times.
That will be entered into the record.
Thank you.
Representative Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for being with us today. Mr. Kent, you said that a president has the right to remove an ambassador because the ambassador served at the pleasure of the president. Is that correct?
That is correct, ma'am.
Does that removal usually come with the smear campaign of that ambassador by the president?
I think the right of the president to make a decision about the president's personal representative, as confirmed by the Senate, is separate from whatever happens outside the confines of U.S. government processes.
Do you have any idea why it was important to discredit Ambassador Yovanovitch, what she was not willing to do or to do, why that was important?
Well, I guess it probably depends on the motivation of other people, and I am not one of them.
The committee's investigation has uncovered a web of shadow diplomacy engaged in and executed by several State Department officials and the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and ultimately directed by President Trump. We have heard several ways of describing this shady shadow operation, shadow diplomacy, rogue back channel. Ambassador Taylor, you have described what you encountered as the top diplomat on the ground in Ukraine as and I quote, highly irregular, informal channel of U.S. policymaking. You testified that the channel included Ambassador Volker, Sondland, Secretary Perry, and as you later learned, the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Both of you have explained that you grew seriously concerned when you realized that the interests of this irregular channel diverged from official U.S. policy and interests. Was Mr.
That statement cannot be overlooked. I don't care which party you belong to. If you are someone who believes in the law. I'm not claiming to be that kind of someone. I'm asking you to think about it, right? Like, this is supposed to be a country of laws, a nation of people first, all of whom agree, whether you think it's a good idea or you think it's a stupid idea, for whatever reason, our society is built on the tacit agreement that no one is above the law. Now, that's a really beautiful phrasing of that idea, but it also means that you are a subject to the law, right? You are subjugating your freedom to that which we abstractly call the law. And whose law is that? It's not necessarily the law of God or anything, right? Because this is supposed to be separation of church and state, even though we simultaneously run around calling ourselves a Christian nation. That's a whole nother episode. But what I'm saying is quite simple. Democrat, Republican, Independent, Christian, or some other religion, doesn't matter. If you consider yourself an American and you really want to make America a better place, and you really want everyone to put America first, then you got to stop and ask yourself, where are we, collectively speaking, as Americans, truly and correctly supposed to place our allegiance? In Donald Mystery J. Trump, used to be Trump personally, as a human individual, question mark, exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point, question mark? Because that's what people want. You, as a supporter or potential supporter of Trump and what he represents as the symptomology of our society, that's what you are supposed to do. In believing in some kind of system of something, and in which case I humbly submit to you, dear listeners, that as far as Trump is concerned, consciously, unconsciously, on purpose and by accident, systematically and endemically, as part of the puppeteering of it all, is the appeal and addiction, like the ability to quickly be addicted to. God, I butchered that sentence. At the center of all their tactics lies, I would humbly suggest to you, indeed, the honeypot, the sweet, sticky honeypot that lures you into subjugating your free will. And that honeypot is the cult of personality. You blindly agree with Donald Trump because you welcome, absorb, feel comfortable by, want to emulate, and become his personality archetype. And when you think that way and you pledge allegiances that way, you aren't really looking out for everyone's greater good, are you? You're not even really looking out for the greater good of the, quote, state. You've transcended in an awkward, not really upward, but sort of sideways and fucked up, dare I even say downward, sliding, shall I put the word slippery slope in this sentence, of an ego trap that is, charisma in its dark modality. And the appeal of personality power, personality magic. And we come full circle to something I've talked about before and I've awkwardly pinned up on the wall, word magic. So scan my volume 1 of episodes there's episodes about where I talk about word magic. So like dip into that for a hot minute. And then think about such things as like, I pledge allegiance. Does it say I pledge allegiance to the Donald J. Trump in the Pledge of Allegiance? No. You're pledging allegiance to a magical sky cloth. And one of my favorite memes in the whole world. If you don't pledge allegiance hard enough, the magical sky cloth won't sports ball. So we can criticize at multiple levels, right? And where am I trying to get to with my criticism? I don't know, but the timer on this tape just hit 5445, which tells me it's a great place to pause my actual recording and then resume, so it makes it easier to listen to and manage it all. Or should I just keep going with one big giant? I got 380 hours left, so it's not like I'm running out of space anytime soon. Let's just roll with it. Okay. Let's see what else they do next. But yeah, all that being said and all that understanding, the people here, I think, are as much earnest and real about what they're trying to achieve, regardless of which side they're on, as they are also simultaneously being played and manipulated. That's the real insidiousness of the system as it actually works, folks. If you're not sure what I mean, go randomly sample Good Morning Trumptopia. Hop around for a few episodes. I think you'll get what I'm talking about. But here, for the historical record of it, as it is quite the strange and bizarre kind of moment to be living through, the very first, if you're just joining us now, friends and listeners, the very first of all the public impeachment hearings of dear old Donald Mystery J. Drumpf. Oh, sorry. I just think that's funny, right? Like, Trump, he ruined the word Trump when he changed the family name. Well, he didn't change it. Someone a generation and a half ahead of him changed it, but he is the same archetype of himself, right? The way you are the same archetype of yourself. And each lifetime you go around the meat grinder merry-go-round of life and death, you either learn a lesson or set up more obstacles for yourself. I wonder who wrote the Book of Love and where on the upward spiral or downward spiral spectrum is Donald Trump. And I don't mean that in like a spectrum of autism. I don't mean to disrespect autism folks that way. I mean the enlightenment or enslavement upward spiral, downward spiraled spectrum. And ding, 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 it is now currently on Pacific Time Zone 1 p.m. For the record, if you're joining me now, whenever I watch the news, whenever I watch political news, I sit in a semi-meditative stance of projecting at those traumatized human meat puppets as much healing as this humble little traumatized talking human meat puppet can send to them. Because that's what Mother Nature is calling us to actually do. That's the default calling. Has always been. And I talk about that a lot in Volume 1. If you haven't checked that out yet, be sure to make the time and binge a few episodes. By the way, for those of you who are really new and just joining us now, or for those of you who've been following on for a really long time, I'm excited to say that yes, I am indeed, finally now, after much teasing and taunting, following through on the Remix Reboot project. And if you'll note, if you have been a longtime listener and you haven't gone to the Sprecher page recently and actually physically looked at it, I humbly invite you to come do so, because words, edit this part out later. If you come and take a visit to my Sprecher account, you'll note that I have set aside Season 1. I did that before for really old-time listeners, and you might remember that period. In fact, if you go way back to the YouTube days, you'll remember that when I first started on Sprecher, I actually had multiple shows, each running different, containing the various segments. And then someone, for better or worse, told me that, I had listeners, essentially I would have listeners running around looking for content on different pages. Why couldn't I just do it all on one page? And the funny thing is, Sprecher does that for you anyway. So no matter how many shows you create on an account that lets you create multiple shows, your default profile has all of them that are publicly available just there in a big, straightforward chronological row. And I don't say that because I'm like narcissistically hung up about it. It just is, I'm remembering, and it's quite humorous and interesting to me. But my point is, I've now finally utilized what I discovered and learned from that previous attempt at doing multiple seasons, and I'm now calling the 100 and some odd number of episodes that are on that bucket, on that page. That's going to be called Volume 1. Sprecher will call it Season 1, but all the graphics I create will say Volume 1. And so I'm never going to add any more new episodes to Volume 1, but I am going to go through and cherry pick some to remix and reboot, and then I will republish them here, and by here I mean in the present tense future place of Volume 2. And in the place of Volume 1 version of the episode, I may just leave some new recording, depending on my mood, indicating and teasing and promoting the fact that the episode has been rebooted and remixed and will be re-aired in Volume 2. It all depends. I don't know. I may tinker with that formula, but I'm just kind of teasing it out now so that y'all are aware. And the humble invitation is truly, honestly, genuinely, if you have not been to my Sprecher.com profile in a really long time, or ever at all, no judgment, no worries from me, but come on down for a visit. Come see Cal. Like the old cowboy guy used to say on the car commercials. Come see the old Mr. Zeppo on his crazy profile page. And please note, it does not matter whether you start listening to the very newest episode, even the ones inclusive of Volume 2, or if you begin with the very, very oldest, quote-unquote, first episode at the beginning of Volume 1, either way works right now, and that as of this recording, and for the foreseeable future, that's going to remain true and applicable, as I'm not going to be adding a lot of new episodes right away. So you've got a couple of weeks to really catch up. And then hopefully after that, I'm going to be posting a lot of new and remixed episodes. It'll be a whole new, but all the new stuff that I add up from now on will be on the Volume 2 page. Only like a remixing and or slight tweaking will happen to Volume 1 from here on out. In other words, the most I will do to a Volume 1 episode is like take it, layer in some music because it didn't have any ever in the, between the bookends of the opening title and the closing title, and then maybe add a little behind the scenes clip at the end as a kicker because I love those kinds of things. And I've been finding and discovering and compiling some really quirky bits here and there. But other than that, they're going to remain exactly as they are right now. So like semi-set in stone, not quite. I do want to just add a little bit of music content. No interruption of the show, and only some minimal trimming of oohs and ahs and ums and and any weird dead ends that like go absolutely nowhere and like maddeningly offensive to me as a listener. If I'm like, whoa, I hate that branch. If I just trim it to here, it all makes way more sense. I might take those liberties. But anyways, I digress. The point is, boom. One epoch has come to fruition and is 99.9% exactly what I would really love it to fully be, and a whole new era is beginning. And opening act is, quite literally, this ongoing capturing for the archival purposes of Please Don't Sue Me, whatever channel I'm on, which I won't reference, about it, because fuck off, this is history here. And everyone has copies of it, and it'll be all over the internet anyways. But I want my own. You can tell this is real. This I didn't edit, guys. Like, true to my warning, I will never use deepfake. True to my disclaimers episode. But also, I will try to be as clear and as overt about the context going on. This is actually me. I'm an hour and 4 minutes and 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds in to a live taping of redacted name of movie channel. That's my cynical playwright voice bumping in and making an edit that's too funny. But this is my real live capturing. I haven't edited anything out yet. From the moment I turn on my TV, except for me pausing the TV to add commentary, there's been no manipulation whatsoever of the chronology of the thing. And I'm going to let it roll for a good 45 minutes now. I'm going to let it go.
Beyond promoting U.S. national interests or policy in Ukraine, Ambassador?
I don't think so, ma'am.
Mr. Kent?
No, he was not.
What interests do you believe he was promoting, Mr. Kent?
I believe he was looking to dig up political dirt against a potential rival in the next election cycle.
Ambassador Taylor? What interests do you believe he was promoting?
I agree with Mr. Kent.
The State Department's role is to promote U.S. policies overseas, not to help the current president win re-election. Is that correct, Mr. Kent?
All federal government employees are subject to the Hatch Act, and our actions are supposed to be promoting policy and not involved in partisan politics.
Ambassador Taylor?
I agree.
What is the risk of running a separate channel of diplomacy that is completely outside of normal channels and does not further U.S. policy goals, Ambassador Taylor?
Ms. Demings, it's possible to do one, but not the other. That is, if it's completely against U.S. policy goals, then that's a mistake. Then it's not helpful. You can get advice and even have conversations outside of the normal channels, but then they need to be part of U.S. foreign policy and approaching those goals.
Mr. Kent?
Agree.
Ambassador Taylor, you have described in your previous testimony one instance shortly after you arrived in Ukraine in which Ambassador Sondland asked State Department officials not to listen to a July 28th call he had planned to hold with President Zelensky. Did you find that unusual?
I did.
What was the impact of Ambassador Sondland making that request? And you found it unusual. What do you believe the impact was?
Ms. Demings, I'm not sure there was an immediate impact.
Was there a recording or transcription?
There was not. That was the impact. It was not recorded.
Do you think that's why the request was made, so there would not be normal State Department employees from the Operations Center would have been there transcribing and taking notes?
That is the norm, but it is also it is not unusual to not have it recorded.
So you know that the State Department is holding your notes and refuses to provide them to Congress despite a duly authorized subpoena. And we know that in some instances your notes may be the only documentary record of what happened. You are aware of that,
yes,
correct? And Mr. Kent, you are aware that your notes have not been turned over to Congress?
I have turned all records that I had in my possession to the State Department because whatever we do is considered a federal record, not a personal record.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request.
Gentleman will state his request.
I have a New York Times op-ed stating why President Obama should have done more in investing in Ukraine by a trio of ambassadors, which includes William Taylor.
Without objection, that will be admitted into the record. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'd like to walk you through a couple points raised by my colleagues on the other side. One is they claim that the July 25th call summary shows no evidence of pressure on the Ukrainian government. In fact, they argue the Ukrainians did not feel any pressure at any time to comply with any of President Trump's requests for investigations. In fact, Ambassador Taylor, at your deposition in October, you stated that due to the hold that President Trump placed on aid to the Ukrainians became, quote unquote, desperate. Isn't that right?
In August, they did not know, as far as I'm aware, but at the end of August, the article came out. In September, the Minister of Defense, for example, came to me, I would use the word desperate, to figure out why the assistance was being held. He thought that perhaps if he went to Washington to talk to you, to talk to the Secretary of Defense, to talk to the President, he would be able to find out and reassure provide whatever answer was necessary to have that assistance released.
In fact, my colleagues on the other side suggest that President Zelensky personally did not feel any pressure at any time, and yet later on in September, he finally relented in a conversation with Gordon Sondland, according to your deposition, in which he agreed to make a statement on CNN. Isn't that right?
He had planned to make a statement on CNN, yes, sir.
My colleagues also say that the hold on U.S. security assistance was lifted on September 11th without any investigations happening on the part of the Ukrainians, and therefore everything ended up fine in the end. However, Mr. Kent, as you know, the House Intelligence, Foreign Affairs, and Oversight Committees began this current investigation leading to the proceedings today on September 9th. In fact, it was only 2 days after this particular set of committees began their investigations that the Trump administration eventually released the military aid, correct?
That is a timeline, yes.
Mr. Ambassador Taylor, between the time of your October deposition and now,
Let's talk about that for a hot second, right? The military aid that got held up, that everyone's arguing about, that the Republicans say is not a quid pro quo action, got held up until, in point in fact, 2 days after the route of investigation was opened and declared to the White House. That's exactly the wrong kind of timing, in my opinion, for someone who wants someone else to believe that there was no criminal infraction here. That thinks all kinds of sideways for Mr. Drumpf. And I don't say that out of disrespect. That's just the family's actual name, right? Okay, anyway, I said I was going to comment anymore. I'm just going to let it roll. And, you know, catching this and preserving this for historical posterity, because we're going to be talking about this and arguing about this as it happens for the next several days and or possibly weeks and or possibly months in terms of it happening and people not coming to a settled conclusion. And then once it's done and whatever decision is made by the body and the hearing, it's not a court, but, you know, by the what is it that was convened? They convened a jury, not jury duty, but yeah, they convened a jury of senators. Whatever they vote and whether or not he's going to be kicked out of office or he will run again and be reelected. That's the delightfully silly and quite literally, if you think about it, politically pointless melodrama that we're going to be fighting blue in the face through Thanksgiving about. Yucca, yucca, yucca. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say no more, say no more.
Investigations, isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
You were concerned that irregular channels of diplomacy were being used in our foreign policy in the Ukraine, right?
Yes, sir.
Ambassador Taylor, can you rule out the possibility that these irregular channels of diplomacy are being used in other countries where we conduct foreign policy?
I can't. I've not heard of any other separate channel that has this kind of influence. That is the Giuliani kind of guidance.
But you can't rule it out, right?
No, sir.
And how about you, Mr. Kent? You can't rule it out either, right?
I have no basis to make a determination.
You don't believe the July 25th call was perfect, did you? Do you?
I think some of the language in the call gave cause for concern.
Ambassador Taylor?
I agree.
And what was the cause for concern for you?
There was part of the discussion of the previous ambassador was a cause for concern.
I'm curious, will they directly reference, that's a good point, right? Like shots fired. He discussed and vaguely made crazy, weird Bambino Is it Gambino or Bambino? But, like mafioso style. And she's gonna go through a lot of things. She's gone through a lot of things. When I say that, it means there's a dead hippopotamus in your bedroom on top of your face. That was a really weird Godfather, horrible, bad impression.
Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, let's have unanimous.
What purpose does the gentleman see?
I thank the chairman. I have unanimous consent. Ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Mr. Mulvaney's statement where he said there's absolutely no quid pro quo from October 17th, 2019.
Without objection. Mr. Nunes, you're recognized for any closing comments you'd like to make.
Mr. Chairman.
I've recognized Mr. Nunes for his comments. Ms. Conaway.
My memory buffer is now full, and I can't pause, quote, live TV anymore, so I'm just going to have to yell the commentary at you over their talking.
We'll have a very
if I
brief
add any.
recess. Members should not go far. We will resume and take up Mr. Conaway's motion. Mr. Nunes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be brief. I want to reiterate what I said earlier, and that is that we really should stop holding these hearings until we get the answer to three important topics. The first being the full extent of the Democrats' prior coordination with the whistleblower, and who did the whistleblower coordinate with. Second, the full extent of Ukraine's election meddling against the Trump campaign. And third, why did Burisma hire Hunter Biden, and what did he do for them? And did his position affect any government actions, U.S. government actions under the Obama administration? You are not allowing those witnesses to appear before the committee, which I think is a problem. So we'll expect, hopefully, you will allow us to bring in the whistleblower, the folks that he spoke to, and also numerous Democratic operatives who worked with Ukraine to meddle in the election. And that I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today, for your decades of service to the country. I think you exemplify so many courageous men and women who serve in the diplomatic corps, who served in our military, who represent the United States so well around the world. I appreciate how you endeavored to stay out of the fray, to relate what you heard, what you saw, without additional commentary. That is as it should be. You were both compelled to appear, and we are grateful that you answered the lawful subpoenas that you received. The story that you have shared with us today and your experiences, I think, is a very deeply troubling one. It is the story of a dedicated ambassador, someone who served with great distinction, Ambassador Yovanovitch, who was the subject of a vicious smear campaign at the beginning of the year. It is the story of once this ambassador was pushed out of the way, the creation of a irregular channel, which, Ambassador Taylor, you described, went all the way from the president through Mick Mulvaney, through Ambassador Sondland, through Ambassador Volker, to Rudy Giuliani. That over time became apparent was not serving the U.S. interest, but running deeply contrary to the U.S. interest, was in fact conditioning a White House meeting that the President of Ukraine desperately sought to establish himself as the new President of Ukraine and to demonstrate to friend and foe alike that he had a relationship with his most powerful patron, the United States of America, and conditioned $400 million of bipartisan taxpayer-funded military support for a nation at war on the front lines of Russian expansionism. A suspension of which was not in the U.S. interest, not in Ukraine's interest, not in our national security interest in no way, shape, or form. You've described a situation in which those in the service of the president made it clear to the Ukrainians they need to publicly announce these investigations or they weren't going to get that meeting, and they sure weren't going to get that military assistance. Now, I would point out, and this may not have come to your attention, but it certainly came to our attention. On September 9th, the Inspector General informed our committee that the Director of National Intelligence was withholding a whistleblower complaint in violation of the statute. By that point, on September 9th, that complaint had made its way to the White House. On September 9th, when the Inspector General informed Congress that that complaint had been withheld, the White House also learned that Congress now inevitably would learn about the complaint. It was less than 48 hours later that the military aid would be released. Over the weeks to come, or over the days to come, rather, we will hear from other dedicated public servants about other aspects of this effort to invite foreign interference in our election, to condition a White House meeting and military aid for the performance of political favors for the president's reelection campaign. We will hear from other witnesses. I appreciate members on both sides of the aisle who I think participated today in a serious way and in a civil way. This is as it should be. There is no shortage of strong feelings about what this means to the country. At the end of the day, we're going to have to decide, based on the evidence that you and others provide, whether we're prepared to accept in the presence of the United States a situation where the president, for their own personal or political benefit, can condition military aid, diplomatic meetings, or any other performance of an official act in order to get help in their reelection. Whether we will need to accept in this president or any future president the idea that the President of the United States can invite a foreign country to intervene in our affairs. These are the decisions we will have to make when we have to decide whether this president should be impeached. But I want to thank you again. Just conclude by saying, because I can't let it go unanswered, several of my colleagues made the statement repeatedly that I've met with the whistleblower, that I know who the whistleblower is. It was false the first time they said it. It was false the second through 40th time they said it. It will be false the last time they say it. With that, this concludes this portion of the hearing. I want to thank you, gentlemen. I ask everyone to remain in their seats. The witnesses are excused. Please allow them to leave the committee room. We will, once they leave the committee room, take a brief recess, and then we will resume to take up Mr. Conaway's motion. And once again, I thank you, gentlemen.
The first public impeachment hearing now on a short break. Welcome to our special coverage. I'm Jake Tapper in Washington.
Okay, now you guys know which channel I was monitoring. But I'm going to take this opportunity here to push pause, start a fresh tape, virtually speaking, because obviously it's all electrical. There is a smart, young, androgynous, female, apparently gendered cop. I don't want to assume anybody's gendered, but like person in uniform that is like sexy in a robot kind of way. And I don't mean to be a distraction and be weird about it, but they cut to cacophony of stuff, everybody moving away, and then they cut to outdoor in the hallway, and there was like a seat, like just a shot of bright cameras and lights and the door where someone might exit. And there's a cop person who read to me like Irish descent, redheaded, strawberry, like athletic and thin frame, petite, muscular kind of female to me, but it could have been a male, and I don't know. But they were interesting, not for their gender, but rather for how like precise and precision oriented their posture and their uniform and their movement was. They were like looking from one side of the room to the other side of the room and like moving, and it was like an animatronic, it was like someone out of Westworld. It was a trip, man. Are the robots already here? Because if they are, man, I'm missing out. What the fuck? Okay, we'll be back for part 2 of impeachment.